At 7 p.m., the valet stand is empty, the oak doors locked, and a sign whispers, "Closed for private event." I smooth my best jacket, the one I saved for his wedding, and feel that quiet heat mothers know half shame, half steel. My phone still shows the message. Saturday 7 p.m., don't be late. When I call, I hear music, laughter, and intercom announcing boarding. A woman's voice, sharp as perfume, slips through. He actually went, then the apology, the word that undoes 40 years of sacrifice, autocorrect. I'm a grandmother, a widow, a woman who learned to stretch every dollar, and I brought a gift that would have erased their debts and blessed their start. But standing under a streetlight, I understand the invitation wasn't an error. It was a test. I take the check from my pocket, hold the future between my fingers, and feel my hands stop shaking. Paper tears clean. Somewhere a jet roars. The night tells the truth. On paper, I deliver mail, the kind of steady work people nod at kindly and forget by dinner. In truth, I have spent my life routing freight through storms and strikes, building a quiet machine that feeds families I'll never meet. 72 looks different on every woman. On me, it's soft hands that still remember heavy cartons, and a back that straightens whenever someone doubts me. I don't need introductions anymore. I need peace and a little honesty. You can read a neighborhood from its porch's chipped paint, careful geraniums, wind chimes that brag about good years and warn about bad. Most days, I like being invisible. The lady in the blue jacket with a ring of keys and a pocket of rubber bands. People tell me their secrets because they think I won't understand the big ones. I do. I have balanced ledgers and broken news. I have signed the checks and swept the floor. Power, I learned, works best when it whispers. Silence has always kept me company. Before the house got quiet, there were 2 coffee cups by the sink, and one rule above the rest: we would raise a man, not an heir. We learned that promise in lean years, when the radiator coughed and the tires bawled and every decision carried the weight of groceries. Love, we decided, doesn't spoil when you keep it working. We taught chores like skills and money, like weather, predictable sometimes, but never personal. When he wanted brand names, we offered brand standards: show up, keep your word. Tell the truth, return the shopping cart. We let him earn late nights and learn early mornings. We clapped for changes he made, not allowances he spent. There was never a someday, this will all be yours. There was someday you won't need what's ours. I wanted him to understand that dignity is lighter to carry than debt, and that success without character is just a costume. The world would dress him up. We hoped to make sure it couldn't undress his soul. View Park isn't fancy, it's faithful. The hills hold late sun like a secret, and the sidewalks remember children who outgrew their scooters, but not their courage. I can map my life by the crepe myrtles that refuse to quit blooming. In the hallway, there's a frame that everybody dusts without touching his smile. A paper program from a church picnic, tucked behind it, the corner worn to velvet. When the evening leans in, I talk to that picture like it's a window. I ask what he would say about the stain on the ceiling, the squeak in the door, the way the boy's laughter got thin around the edges when ambition started dressing him. The kitchen clock still ticks 5 minutes fast because a long time ago, punctuality was our apology. I set 2 plates sometimes, then put 1 away. People see a small house. I see a promise kept. Roots don't brag. They just hold you steady when the weather changes. Home is ordinary, and that saves me. It confuses people that a woman can sign contracts with one hand and fold coupons with the other. Modesty keeps me awake to the cost of things, not just the dollars, but the dignity. I learned early that money speaks over you if you don't give it strict instructions. So I told ours to be quiet, to work nights, to grow in the dark, where envy can't root. The car is older than some marriages, but it starts, and it doesn't ask for applause. My coat is mended at the cuff with small stitches you'd only see if you loved me. I like it that way. I don't owe shiny people explanations. Wealth is the loudest liar. It promises safety while it steals hunger's wisdom. I kept the hunger. It keeps a woman quick, grateful, hard to fool. When you live under the radar, you can see who waves at the plane and who counts seats in the lifeboat. I prefer to steer quietly from shore. It suits me fine. Some men announce themselves by volume. He announces himself by margins. He's the only person I know who can love a spreadsheet and a human with the same careful attention. We built the company in the space between our paychecks, borrowing time. Not money promising vendors pancakes if the checks were late. He could read a contract like a cardiologist reads a pulse. What's irregular? What can be fixed? What will kill you if you ignore it? When my temper sparked, he would tilt his head and wait for the weather to pass. When his pride bristled, I'd hand him a broom and talk while we swept. Years teach you who should share your silence. He did. People see him now, sharp suit, confident gait, the room bending to make room, and think that's the whole story. It isn't. The story is two stubborn kids loading pallets, laughing at our blisters, deciding to be fair even when it was slow. Loyalty, we learned, pays better than interest. We kept that promise together. He was the kind of boy who measured Saturdays by grease on his elbows and the distance a paper airplane could travel without folding. Under the Lincoln's hood, he'd pass me sockets like communion, solemn and proud, while the radio preached Motown and baseball. He laughed with his whole chest, unafraid of neighbors hearing joy. I kept a jar for lost screws and found courage. He reached into both without asking. When a bolt stuck, he'd set his jaw and learn patience. The honest way, turn, breathe, try again. We taught him the poetry of torque and the math of kindness. Tighten enough to hold, never so hard you strip the thread. On hot afternoons, we'd eat popsicles on the stoop and talk future like it was a kite we'd both hold. I told him every tool has a purpose, even the small ones. He believed me then. Boys don't always stay boys, but sometimes a laugh returns in a man's face, and you remember who he could still be someday. She walked in, wearing that careful kind of elegance that wants witness eyes glancing off picture frames, like they were fingerprints. Cozy, she said, letting the word cool air by 10 degrees. I offered sweet tea, and she requested sparkling water, by brand the way a person spells out boundaries. I noticed how her smile paused at the shelf of school photos, as if pride were contagious. Some women make rooms warmer, some take measurements. I've met both. I told myself to be generous, to let newness explain the sharp edges, but generosity loses its way around contempt. When dinner came, she placed her fork like a verdict, asked what we planned to pass down, and managed to turn love into inventory. History, I said. Recipes. Good name. She nodded like she was being patient with a child. The house listened. Houses do. Doors remember voices. Chairs remember weight. Later, when the lights were out, I realized Cozy had been a draft sneaking under everything I'd set to keep warm. I cooked what feeds memory short ribs, braised low with onions, until the house smelled like Sunday cornbread that forgives your weak greens, that insist patience is edible. She glanced demurred and asked again for bubbles in a glass bottle, the label facing out like a small flag. I'm not offended by preference. I'm wary of performance. He filled her plate anyway, eager as a new moon, and she rearranged the food as if she could tidy away where he came from. There are 1,000 tiny ways to say someone is less, and none of them require raised voices. She used them all, the delicate napkin dab, the phone held close like a mirror, the sigh that says, effort is quaint. I watched him watch her, and something in his shoulders bent some thread that used to pull him upright. I ate my dinner. I complimented her bracelet. Kindness doesn't mean blindness. It means I will remember, and I will decide what to do with what I remember. She asked it like a survey question, a checkbox away from disappearing me. What does your side bring? I wanted to say. Casseroles and hurricanes. Neighbors who show up before sirens, hymns that know every kitchen echo. Instead, I smiled with my teeth and told her the truth, as we told it to ourselves. Work a good name, the kind of credit you can't swipe. She began reciting assets like a bedtime story, summer places and collections with certificates. Funds that sound like names. I have seen a lot of ledgers. The fattest ones still end with liabilities. I asked what she valued on bad days when a person is only the shape of their choices. She blinked and room-tilted towards silence. There are people who believe legacy is a staircase you climb by stepping on the quiet. I am not one of them. In our house, legacy wipes counters and calls back. It settles disputes with a measuring cup. It shows up rain or shine and leaves the light on. It starts small the way a collar changes a man's neck. The suits got slimmer, the smile more practiced, the laughter rationed like a luxury item. He began apologizing for things that never needed forgiveness. The zip code, the car, the fact that I still cook on cast iron. Pride should make a person taller. His made him careful, like he was trying to fold himself into someone else's expectations. I knew that feeling once when I first learned you could be right and still not be invited. I wanted to tell him belonging bought on credit is the most expensive purchase. But mothers learn to choose their moments. I ironed his shirt. I handed him leftovers in foil. I asked whether the work felt good in his hands. He said the word standard a lot like it was a passport. I looked at his shoulders and missed the boy who squared them. Sometimes people don't notice they're shrinking until they need to lift something heavy. Then the bill arrives. I didn't mean to listen, but homes conduct sound like old pianos. Voices travel the length of a hallway and change keys by the time they land. Liability was the word whispered like a diagnosis. My thrift became a threat, my address an obstacle, my age a line item. I have earned plenty of names, that one still scraped. They spoke of deposits and venues and favors owed, and I heard the clatter of a cart with a wobbly wheel. When a story's rolling wrong, you can feel the pull. I stood in the kitchen with soapy hands and let the sting pass. There's dignity in washing what you didn't dirty. I wiped the counter. I set out dessert anyway. People who confuse love with leverage always reveal themselves. They measure relationships in returns, and their math ignores compounding losses, trust time tenderness. I decided then to step out of their ledger and back into my ledger, the one where you can afford to be kind without becoming naive. Silence can be a shelter or a scalpel. I chose it as a shelter first, to cool my temper and keep my words from bruising what might still be saved. Then I carried it like a scalpel, trimming away illusions, cleanly one by one. I began counting the small slips amissed. Please, a hurried kiss, a text instead of a visit, a new laugh that didn't reach his eyes. I counted purchases like breadcrumbs, parties like proof stories that changed depending on who needed convincing. Tally long enough and a pattern stops pretending. I didn't lecture. I made soup and paid attention. I checked locks. I checked ledgers. I checked in with the part of me that still believes people can turn around. Love isn't blind, it's farsighted. It sees beyond the mess and insists on clean counters. When the invitation arrived, with the date that would later prove a trap, I held my breath. I set the table. I folded napkins. I waited to see which story would arrive. He came alone, which told me more than the words did. He didn't sit. He paced 3 steps, rubbed his neck, 3 more, like a metronome set to worry. Mom, he said, voice pitched for charm and apology at once. I'm short need 50. He didn't say 1,000 until later, as if the syllables could sneak in on softer feet. I poured coffee he wouldn't drink and asked the questions that measure a storm. How urgent? How long? Who's asking? He said venue and deposit. And it's complicated, which is how simple things hide. When I offered stew, he flinched at time not taste. The boy who once asked for help fixing a chain now asked for a bridge across a canyon I couldn't see. I remembered late notices from our early years and the way we learned to breathe through them. He watched my face for judgment and found only weather. A few weeks, he promised. Sometimes a mother hears an old lullaby in a grown man's voice and knows she's the only one listening. It wasn't hunger I saw. Hunger knows how to humble a face. This was choreography, shoulders squared for a performance he didn't believe in, eyes darting toward some offstage cue only he could see. He used words I'd never heard in his mouth, syllables dressed in somebody else's wardrobe liquidity timing standards. When I said Brooke's name, something passed through him, like a shadow crossing a porch. Not fear of losing her love, fear of failing her image. Image is a jealous thing, always eating, forever hungry. He kept insisting it wasn't about money, which is how you know it is. I asked what would happen if I said no, and he said words about postponing rescheduling, disappointing people who already assumed a certain level of. He trailed off. I thought of ballroom doors and guest lists, where names open rooms and close hearts. He wanted to borrow not dollars but dignity. Dignity, I've learned, doesn't transfer. You earn it or you don't. Still, I set the mug within his reach. I took out the old checkbook, the one that remembers school registrations and leaky roofs. The pen hesitated over zeros the way a hand hovers above a sleeping child. 50,000 is loud in a quiet kitchen. I wrote it anyway, steady as a nurse threading a needle. There are payments you make to see a truth bloom faster, water for roots, sunlight for the story. Fertilizer isn't sentimental. It's practical, a way to bring what's buried up to the surface where hands can reach it. He tried to hug, and it landed like a receipt proof of transaction, not tenderness. I told him I wasn't worried about the amount. I was worried about the lesson. He nodded as if I had blessed a bride. After he left, I washed the cup he never touched and put the checkbook back. Where faith lives, top drawer beneath a church fan. Some choices aren't about generosity. They're about timelines. If something is going to break better, it breaks where a mother can still sweep. By morning, proof scattered itself like confetti I hadn't ordered. A statement pinged with a payment that wore platinum in its name. Another note for a department store where the lighting is designed to flatter desire. A travel charge that spelled somewhere warm enough to heal anything but character. I didn't have the whole trail yet, just the footprints money leaves when it rushes. Later I would learn times and totals, but mothers recognize patterns before they see spreadsheets. There's a speed to spending that gives away motive. Necessity moves like a careful parent crossing traffic. Performance sprints. I stared at the numbers the way you study a face in bad light, building out bone from hint and shadow. Something about the timing said celebration, not survival. I pictured labels facing outward in a suitcase, receipts folded like alibis, and my son breathing easier because a bill had been paid, with love masquerading as leverage. I rinsed the sink and let the water run, listening for the sound of something cracking clean. The math was soul deep. If I refuse, I watch him choose pride's cheaper cousin's stubbornness and walk further into the crowd that claps for costumes. If I comply, I finance the theater. Either way, love pays. I thought about the women I know, nurses, teachers, clerks, who stand at similar crossroads with smaller numbers and the same ache. We bargain with ourselves. It's a bridge, not a habit, a lesson, not a leash. I asked the only question that matters when the road forks, what keeps dignity intact. Saying no might be righteous and still ruinous. Saying yes might be foolish and still necessary. I chose yes because sometimes a mother needs the truth. Accelerated the mask to slip sooner, the music to stop before the check clears. I told the coffee pot we'd adjust. I told the pantry we'd be fine. Mostly, I told my heart to keep its voice low. Love that lectures can sound like shame. Love that listens can sound like permission. I aimed for something quieter, accountability with a door still open. 3 months slipped by like envelopes into a slot. Small sounds, big consequences. He sent a text promptly, like punctuality could polish intention. Saturday, 7 LaRue. I circled the calendar and cooked ordinary dinners, which are faithful even when no one is. I didn't press. Pressing makes liars better. I waited for invitations with ink for details that add up under bright light. In the quiet, I noticed how silence rearranges furniture. The house looked the same, but the rooms held their breath. I mended a hem and decided that waiting isn't passive. It's a ferocious choice to let truth reach you without grabbing it by the throat. I wondered who would be in the room, what would be served, whether someone would pray before anyone bragged. I pictured the boy who used to race me to the car door, now practicing a toast in a mirror that approves. The text sat there polite as a folded napkin. I said a small prayer for chairs to hold and for names to be called correctly. Banks can smell conviction. The receptionist knew enough to lower her voice and offer water in a glass that made everything seem permanent. I asked for a cashier's check large enough to change weather systems, and I signed with the same hand that coupons and needs dough. The manager glanced at me like I might be a headline and then saw I preferred footnotes. The zeros gathered politely on the page. Ink behaved. Money is obedient right up until it isn't. As the printer hushed, I thought about the first time we scraped together enough to buy a pallet jack. Instead of renting one the way, relief bloomed behind my knees. Nobody teaches women our age how to give large without apologizing for it. I didn't apologize. I folded the check into an envelope that smelled faintly of cedar from the drawer where I keep what cannot be replaced. It felt less like wealth and more like a key cut from patience. I left through the side door. Some blessings travel better in shadow. The plan was simple, the way good bread is few. Ingredients exact timing, a hot enough flame to test what's inside. I did not intend to buy love. I intended to buy space air between my son and anyone who confused compassion with capital. Independence is a room you must build yourself, but a mother can still pay the permit fees. With that check, he could have stood next to anyone without borrowing posture. Maybe he would remember the kitchen where gratitude didn't need invitations. Maybe he would put down the performance and pick up purpose. I wanted to see his face when pressure lifted, when he realized the future wasn't a debt collector. I also wanted every woman watching to know we are more than the cash in our purses. We are the ledger of our choices. This was mine fund, his backbone, not his image. And if the gift revealed rot I couldn't smell yet, then at least we'd rip out drywall and start the honest rebuild sooner. I fastened the bracelet my partner once clasped before big days, a circle of small stones he swore could outlast storms. Ritual isn't magic, but it steadies a woman where she stands. I pinned a loose curl, checked the hem, and tucked the envelope where my hand could find it without searching. There is a grace in getting ready for celebrations, even the wrong ones. It puts your heart in an open shape. I looked at myself the way mothers do, half inventory, half prayer, and promised to respond, not react. I imagined the first toast, the scrape of a chair, the long breath before we say what we mean. I rehearsed what I would tell him, that the money wasn't a favor, it was a vote of confidence, that I was there not to be displayed, but to be present. Hope is a quiet engine. It doesn't drown out traffic, it hums through it. I locked the door behind me and walked to the car like a woman who knows both outcomes and chooses courage anyway. The street outside the restaurant looked dressed for company, but the building hadn't put its earrings on. Empty stand, dark glass, a paper sign pretending gentility. Closed for private event. Private, I thought, has 100 meanings, and most of them mean without you. I tried the handle out of habit, as if manners could unlock bolts. The clock on my wrist insisted I was right on time. My breath made a small cloud I could have cupped like a candle. Weddings begin and end 1,000 times before the music starts, first in a mother's mind, then in a child's decisions. I waited 1 full minute, the way you do when you hope a door is late, not locked. The night had that expensive hush certain neighborhoods practice. It would have been a beautiful evening for belonging. I took out my phone, opened the message again, Saturday, 7 p.m. Don't be late, and felt my hand steady with the kind of calm that knows it's being measured. Airports have their own weather announcements, wheels a collective rush toward departure. When he answered, the wind of other people's plans blew straight into my ear music, clipped by an intercom laughter that belonged to rooms I wasn't in. I said the restaurant name carefully, the way you say a password. A woman's voice slid beneath his, like a sharp note in a choir. She actually went. He sputtered something about confusion yesterday. A venue I hadn't been told about, a calendar that turned itself inside out. This is the part where some mothers beg. I didn't. I let silence sit down between us and order a drink. "We'll make it up to you," he said, already angling his body toward a gate. "The world calls it a honeymoon when two people travel together. Sometimes it's just an exit." I hung up before my voice could betray me. Standing on the sidewalk, I understood less about their schedule and more about their story. "Autocorrect," he said later in a text, and the word did all the work a lie wants blame. The machine pity the sender, hope the receiver still wants to be fooled. I have seen autocorrect turn love into live proud into pound, but it has never rented a ballroom. I scrolled back through every message the way a woman checks a bruise for yellow. When a story is patched together with shrinking fabric seams show. The problem wasn't the date, it was the intention. Errors apologize, plans hide. I thought about all the women who have stood outside rooms they paid for in one way or another and been told the address changed. Shame tried to rise. I told it to sit. There's no shame in being honest. There's a different word for being excluded on purpose. It starts with cruel and ends with tie. I slipped the phone back into my purse and felt for the envelope. It was there, patient as a lesson. Paper tears clean when you do it with conviction. I folded once, twice, like I was tucking a child into a bed I had just made. The sound was louder than I expected, final like a latch falling. Someone's jet lifted in the dark, a reminder that departures are always available to the unburdened. I wasn't angry in the movie sense, no thunder, no theatrical speeches that solve what history created. I was exact. There are moments you do not defer, you decide. That money was meant to free a man, not feed a machine designed to grind down mercy. I shredded what would have become a leash and watched the pieces settle like winter on a curb. Maybe they would fly, maybe they would compost. Either way, they were finished as currency and ready to become something else. I put my hand on my chest and felt my heart quiet. Doors close. That's their job. The miracle is that windows keep inventing themselves, and a woman who has weathered storms knows how to open one. I drove straight to the tower, the city spread below like an instrument waiting to be played. The guard didn't ask questions. Women my age are easy to mistake for harmless, which is a useful camouflage. I called Jules from the elevator so he would hear the doors close and know I wasn't bargaining with grief. 8 a.m., I said I want legal compliance estates and our outside counsel. He didn't ask why. Good partners read the weather, not just the forecast. In my office, I turned on only the desk lamp. Rage wastes fuel. Precision conserves it. I wrote a list assets to wall off proof to collect timelines to compress. When the sun pushed at the glass, Jules walked in with that look he saves for winter roads, careful, fast. "We can fix this," he said. "We won't fix people." I answered, "We'll fix paper. Law is just a series of doors." I intended to lock the ones that mattered and open the one labeled consequence. We started with names and dates. We hired Kestrel Global the way you hire a surgeon quietly, with clear instructions and zero appetite for theater. The lead sent over a sterile engagement letter, chain of custody protocols, and a clock that billed in 6-minute increments. "Bring me everything on the Prescotts," I said. "Financial, legal, behavioral. If it leaves a shadow, follow it." We defined scope like a picking list. Bankruptcies, liens, pending suits, credit velocity, the provenance of their so-called fund, and the truth behind their Hamptons mythology. No hacking, no corners cut clean, work holds up under light. Kestrel wanted 2 business days. I gave them 1 and a retainer that made incentives plain. I added a request mothers rarely make but often wish for. If you find kindness anywhere in their record, don't skip it. I want the whole human, not just the headlines. The analyst paused, then nodded. People underestimate what a woman will do once she's done being underestimated. We signed encrypted and hit go. By noon, Jules had 3 appointments on my calendar with neurologists who test minds the way jewelers test stones. I sat in bright rooms with polite art and answered questions designed to trip feet that won't lift recall sequencing problem-solving numbers forward and back. I balanced check ledgers in my head, and explained bill of lading exceptions to a man who didn't expect to enjoy the story. They showed shapes, I named them. They asked for patterns, I extended them. We laughed when appropriate, which is another kind of cognition. At day's end, a notary stamped what I already knew: capacity isn't a rumor, it's a record. Kestrel couriered the affidavits in duplicate 3 signatures. Hospital seals a summary line that felt like vindication and warning cognitive performance. At the 99th percentile for age, no evidence of impairment, capable of managing complex finances. I filed the originals the way sailors file maps. Let anyone try to draw a different coastline. Paper-like memory is strongest when layered. Trusts are love letters that lawyers translate into clauses. We sat with estates at 8 sharp, and I slid the deed across polished wood like a photograph of a child. Irrevocable, I said so. Even grief couldn't argue later. We named it for the girl whose smile fits in my phone and in my pocket, the Maya Carter Irrevocable Education Trust. Beneficiary 1 child, trustees 2 adults who know the difference between duty and convenience. Prohibitions explicit: no liens, no loans, no occupancy by parents, no sale without educational purpose. We signed in blue, so the originals would tell on forgery, and the notary's seal pressed to the page like a thumb to a pulse. Outside, a jacaranda was pretending it wasn't time to shed. Inside, I decided shedding was the only faithful act. This house is a story I told Jules. I'm giving it a reader who won't sell the last chapter for shoes. He nodded. The clerk recorded the deed. Somewhere a door that wasn't mine closed softly. Next, we pulled the thread labeled $50,000 because money that lies about its destination tends to brag about its route. Our controller produced the check image. Kestrel matched it to the deposit timestamp and traced the trail through accounts with the boredom of a metronome. The note we drafted was not theatrical. It was exact. Principal $50,000 even. Interest 8% compounded. Retroactive to the date of deposit. Payable upon receipt. We cited the promise he made first of the month, and the additional promise he should never have offered his mother's memory. We included routing numbers, so the only thing left to find was a conscience. He'll call it a gift, Jules said. He will, I answered, and the ledger will disagree. We printed 2 copies, one for hand delivery, one for court, if pride insists on learning from strangers. I don't relish teaching with lawsuits, but I won't let my son mistake mercy for permission either. Paper does what conversations sometimes can't. It remembers without flinching. Information travels fastest on the road between worry and wonder. I chose a cousin with a generous mouth and a heart that forgives quickly, then talked like a woman who sleeps with the lamp on. I can't find it, I whispered, letting the words tremble on purpose. The wedding check. It was very large. She gasped the way good people do when they imagine losing what they've saved. I gave no numbers, only adjectives, then apologized for rambling an old woman's camouflage. By dusk, the story had crossed 3 kitchens and 1 Facebook comment thread rinsed of nuance and polished with alarm. She lost a fortune. I let it breathe. Predators prefer certainty and scent. I offered both. It wasn't malice. It was strategy in a world where some only hear you if you sound fragile. The risk in playing small is forgetting you're not. I wrote that reminder on a post-it and stuck it to the kettle. You're acting. The tea still boiled, so did the plan. Kestrel's first packet landed with the weight of a dull sermon, not surprising, just necessary. Public filings don't lie. They just wait patiently for someone to read them. There it was. Chapter 7, 2 years back. Assets surrendered, obligations tallied like sins. Franklin's fund had died long before it was invoked at my table. The Hamptons' address turned out to be an uncle's house that didn't welcome their car anymore. Revolving credit spun like a carnival ride. Balances chased balances, late fees eating late fees. The dossier smelled of varnish over rot. Memberships paid late, a lawsuit settled quiet. A smile that cost more than it comforted. I asked Kestrel for kindness. They included it, a donation here, a handwritten note They're evidence that even grifters send flowers sometimes. Kindness matters, but arithmetic doesn't care about charm. Add it up, and the answer stayed the same. The Prescotts were prosperity like rented clothes. Return date approaching. Stains non-refundable. I closed the folder, and friction warmed my palms for what came next. The second packet bled arrogance. Forensics had pulled cloud backups and recovered drafts never meant for light. There it was, subject line bright as a siren, step 1. It's done. The body ran like a recipe for manufactured confusion, feed him the wrong date. Keep him uncertain, anchor the story in pity phrases. So worried, not managing well, forgetful. The tone was the worst part. Smug like cruelty could be couture. They documented their future perjury with the carefulness they deny to truth. Screenshots bore timestamps and IP addresses that matched their home like a fingerprint. I read each line with the dispassion I save for invoices. Outrage burns too quickly. They think a mother won't fight herself. I told Jules that I'll be too proud to prove I'm sound. He slid the stack of notarized evaluations back toward me, like a boxer tapping gloves. Then we won't be proud, he said. We'll be thorough. Thorough is slower than rage and 10 times more lethal. I sharpened my quiet. The search history read like a shopping list for a cage. How to get power of attorney in California. Signs of dementia versus normal aging. Fastest way to secure conservatorship. Can a conservator sell a parent's home? Each query was a brick. Together they formed a plan with my name on the deed. I thought about how the internet turns curiosity into evidence and fear into maps. They weren't curious, they were efficient. It takes a peculiar coldness to practice a future signature over a living woman's assets. I felt the cold honored it and set it down. They were counting on me to misplace my temper and prove their point. Instead, I stacked our counterproof, the doctors, the deed, the note, the bank trail. I imagined a courtroom and the way light falls through high windows. Truth likes altitude, so do vultures. The difference is what they eat. I brewed tea, wrote tomorrow's list, and reminded myself that patience isn't passive. It's precision with a longer fuse. I started rehearsal like any professional would, props first. Old cardigan with a snag I never mended, slippers soft at the heel, a magazine turned upside down on the armrest where the neighbors can see it through the window and misremember me fondly. I practiced the breath of a woman who misplaces nouns and clings to names, the hand that pats pockets, without finding the way a voice can wander and return. Not caricature, insults the women who are truly slipping. I wanted believable fog, the kind that confuses schedules but not souls. I set a dim lamp to pool light like a small harbor. I placed a tidy wastebasket near the desk and slid an envelope into the back drawer, shredded security paper, blue-white, indistinguishable, to anyone hungry enough to believe. I tucked the doctor's letters where Jules could reach them in 3 steps. Finally, I stood in the doorway and looked at my living room as a stage. Mercy would be my understudy. Resolve would take the lead. The message from Kestrel arrived short. Almost kind targets checked out early. Seaplane to Papeete, connecting through LAX. Wheels down tomorrow. 7:10 p.m. I pictured them leaving paradise the way gamblers leave tables tight-lipped. Calculating whether the next room pays. The rumor had done its work. Greed hears better than grief. I set the kettle for guests I would not serve. I laid out the promissory note like a place setting. I moved the deed folder to the edge of the coffee table so gravity would deliver it to view. Then I walked the path from sofa to door, smoothing rugs, removing tripping hazards, a courtesy even for wolves. In the mirror, I practiced a grandmother's bewilderment, the way sorrow thins a voice and age drops its ends. Behind that, I tucked the spine of a woman who can lift a pallet jack. When the plane touched down, they believed they were coming to collect a mistake. I was home preparing to count theirs. When the knock came, I let it ring twice, so the performance could arrive before I did. Then I opened the door with both hands as if greeting weather I hadn't ordered. Faces flushed with travel can almost pass for concern. Theirs couldn't quite. I stepped back and let them smell the house that raised the man they wanted to manage. Mom, he said, rehearsed tenderness, catching on a ragged edge. Are you okay? I answered with a smile that didn't find its landing, then drifted toward my chair and the waiting lamp. They fanned out like appraiser's eyes to the mantle ears pricked for weakness. We heard about a check, she said, smoothing her sleeve like a question. I let my gaze blur and find them again. 2,000, I murmured, or 2 million. Her pupils widened the way they do when a slot machine lights. I kept my hands folded to hide how steady they were. The room held its breath. Doors, all of them, began to choose sides. Drew rushed in first breath high and bright, the way people breathe when they need the room to forgive them before they speak. Mom, are you okay? He asked, kneeling beside my chair. I let my hands tremble on the armrest, a small flutter that could be nerves or age, and stared at the lamp as if the light had something important to say. He squeezed my fingers like a promise he couldn't keep. I answered with a wandering smile and a pause long enough to make his worry bloom. I get turned around, I murmured, letting the syllables drift busy day. He looked over his shoulder toward the hallway, the place where secrets usually hide, then back at me with a practiced tenderness that didn't fit his eyes. The house listened. I let it. I kept my shoulders soft, my breath small, my sentences shorter than my thoughts. It felt like holding a note perfectly off-key. His questions multiplied. Mine waited patient as winter at the edge of evening. She arrived a step behind him, tailored concern, wrapped in linen, the kind of softness that creases where control hides. She didn't sit. She tilted toward me, eyes scanning mantel frame's mail basket, then settling on my mouth as if truth might spill there. Where's the check? She asked lightly, like asking for salt. I let my gaze drift past her shoulder, counting dust motes, then brought it back, as though the question had taken the long way around. 2,000, I said, tasting the number, or 2 million. The words hung between us like a chandelier, heavy with someone else's electricity. Her pulse jumped at her neck. I watched it politely. We can help look, she offered, voice, brightening the way salespeople brighten around a commission. I patted my cardigan pocket, then frowned at the empty air. I had it, I whispered. I went to the restaurant. Her perfume was new money and old impatience. She softened her mouth, but her eyes took inventory. Room temperature kindness, refrigerated intent. She asked what I wore like labels could testify. I stroked my sleeve as if recalling a recipe, then let the brand fall out casually, the way a grandmother misplaces a name and finds the right one anyway. Brioni, I said. The syllables did a small, cruel thing to her composure. A tick at the eye, a calculation tripping on itself, a map that didn't match the road. The story she'd rehearsed required me to be threadbare in spirit and cloth. The suit tore a seam in that costume. That's nice, she managed, lips curving without consent. I nodded, mild as steam. It wasn't triumph, it was inventory. In this house, we've mended plenty, but we also recognize quality. By touch, not applause. If a postman wears Brioni, perhaps the mail isn't all she carries. She recalibrated, reaching for sympathies and surfaces. Let's not worry about details, she said, hunting for ground that didn't shift. I sighed gently and let the silence do small necessary work, like stitches closing old weather. They fanned into the kitchen with a choreography I recognized. From estate sales drawers, first, then bins, then the places grief forgets to check. He lifted the metal lid too hard, and it clanged against tile like a bell announcing panic. She knelt at the leather wastebasket near the desk. Good instinct, bad motive, and turned it delicately as if gentleness could bless greed. I watched their fingers shake the way hands tremble when they believe they're touching future. When the first blue-white shard surfaced, it stopped them both. Security paper looks like snow, only to people who haven't been cold. She sifted through the confetti with the focus of a child promised candy for every scrap. He held 2 pieces under the lamp, lining ragged edges like a puzzle with missing teeth. The numerals did their merciless arithmetic, Zeros beside zeros, a comma like a gate. The room shrank to the size of a handful. They forgot to act concerned. They only counted. I noted Breath's shallow quick bargaining with silence. He straightened face-blotched voice rising until the ceiling pushed it back down. "You tore up 2 million, he shouted, and the question wasn't a question at all. It was a verdict looking for a jailer. I let my mouth fall open in a soft, "Oh, the way surprise sits on grandmothers in commercials," then closed it slowly, like a drawer returning home. 2,000, I offered faintly, maybe I added zeros. My memory, I patted my chest as if searching for nouns. The trick, if there is one, is respect never mock the women who truly forget. I was borrowing their manner, not their lives. He paced in tight circles, the kind that leave grooves where rugs used to be. She hissed timelines and lawyers, and words like capacity, as if vocabulary could undo notarized ink. I blinked, nodded, apologized for breathing. Fog is merciful camouflage. Behind it, mountains do their work. I could feel the room tilting toward revelation, and still I stayed small. Small, steady, and waiting. The bell rang twice, crisp like a gavel looking for wood. I let it, then rose with the careful effort people expect from age, and opened the door to Winter in a 3-piece suit. Jules doesn't fill a room. Rooms remember the measurements they took from him. "Good evening," he said to no one and everyone. His voice, the sound a foundation makes when it holds. He brushed past politeness, crossed to my chair, and took my hand in both of his, like a signature. "Did they touch you?" he asked, soft and deadly. I shook my head with an old woman's economy. The air recalculated itself. They tried names. "Who are you?" as if titles could block traffic. He offered none. He set his briefcase down the way a surgeon sets a tray. The house seemed to stand up taller, reminded of its own spine. I sank back into the cushions, letting the performance fade at the edges. Backup had arrived. So had consequence. Cold clarity followed him into our room. He clicked open the latches, snap, snap, and withdrew a cream card that looked heavier than paper has any right to be. He didn't hand it to them. He let it land on the coffee table with a gentle authority, like a verdict sitting down. Eyes dropped because hands were afraid. Black lettering, no flourish. Julian Grant, CEO, Grant and Carter, Logistics. The room rehearsed a new math. Their surprise tried to find dignity and came up short. He met my gaze. I offered the smallest nod. There are moments partnerships are a choir, and others when they're a single note sung true. He turned to them with courtesy, the dangerous kind. "We'll be brief," he said, which is how you know it won't be. They started stepping backward through their earlier confidence, bumping into furniture they hadn't noticed when they believed they owned the place. Titles are just labels, but some labels come with ledgers. This one did, and it was open. Pages waited patient and far less forgiving tonight. He laid 3 folders beside the card, each stamped, sealed, and old-fashioned enough to embarrass rumor. "Independent evaluations," he said, turning the pages so light could read them too. "Names, credentials, tests that don't care who loves you. Trails of numbers leading to a simple sentence. Cognitively intact executive function, superior, fully capable of managing complex financial affairs." He read the summary aloud, without flourish, the way truth likes to be handled. She tried to interrupt with concern, a trembling lip, a paragraph about my safety. He listened, then slid the notarizations forward until their gold seals showed their teeth. "Allegations of incompetence," he said kindly, "tend not to survive evidence." He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at my son, so the sentence would have a home. The room's temperature shifted. Winter became a mirror. I felt my shoulders settle to their natural height. Fog burned off like morning. I stayed quiet because silence carried better than triumph. It travels farther lighter and lasts longer. Then came the thread pulling. Kestrel had prepared a tidy map where every dollar wore a timestamp and a destination like a tiny passport. He narrated without malice: deposit at 10:04 a.m., transfer to a platinum card. By 10:17, balance paid at a store whose mirrors flatter lies. By 10:19, 2 first-class seats to Bora Bora purchased before lunch. Cash in hand at an airport ATM an hour later. None, he concluded, to any venue. The words landed like small stones in a jar until the sound itself argued. My son stared at the page as if staring could subtract. She set her jaw a queen with no kingdom and said something about misunderstandings and timing. The map didn't blush. Money tells stories even when people don't. Jules slid a copy across to them paper, making that gentle shiver only truth makes. I watched shoulders slump under arithmetic. Compassion rose. I kept it seated. Clarity today needed the good chair. Mercy would come later, wearing work boots, not pearls for anyone. Kestrel's final pages tasted of varnish and dust, bankruptcies, liens, memberships that bounced before they were renewed. A private fund dissolved quietly years ago. The lineage she named like a talisman turned out to be borrowed shine. The real owners had changed locks a decade back. Jules didn't sneer. He is efficient, not cruel, but the facts arranged themselves sternly. Prestige had been staged with credit limits and careful angles. I thought of the night she inventoried my home and called it cozy, and how sometimes a person mistakes small for empty. We are not empty. We are edited. He summarized with a sentence you could hang a coat on. The Prescotts have misrepresented capacity and means. She went still in that brittle way lacquered things do before they crack. My son's breath became shallow, an echo of his boyhood asthma when he ran too far on bravado. I set my palm on my knee to keep from reaching toward him. Love can steady without rescuing. Boundaries keep courage honest and useful. Jules placed the deed on the coffee table the way midwives place a newborn firm gentle already documented. The embossed seal caught the lamp and threw back a small sun. He read the name so there'd be no confusion. The Maya Carter Irrevocable Education Trust. Trustees listed prohibitions, explicit purpose singular. No lions, no occupancy by parents, no sale. That doesn't advance her learning and life. This home is no longer an asset to be managed, he said. It is a promise to be kept. The room absorbed the sentence and found it heavy. She started to argue jurisdiction as if vocabulary could bully law. He slid the recorder's stamp across like proof of weather. My son whispered Mom the word suddenly small boy-sized, and I felt it in my ribs. I wanted to tell him houses can love you back if you stop trying to sell their hearts. Instead, I folded my hands and let the ink finish speaking. Promises once recorded outlast tempers, trends, and temporary need for generations. He looked at me, then stripped of posturing all the expensive scaffolding blown aside by paperwork and daylight. You took everything he said, and the sentence wobbled between accusation and plea. I shook my head and kept my voice low enough to be true. I didn't take from you, I said. I protected what your father built and what your daughter deserves. I refused to underwrite your image, not your life. His eyes flicked to the shredded blue-white in Brooke's fists, then to the deed, then to his hands, empty. There was a check, he whispered, clinging to the ghost. There was a future, I answered, and there still is. If you want one, you can carry without borrowing anybody else's spine. I told him love and money share a rule without stewardship. Both decay. He swallowed pride, scratching on the way down. I did not move toward him. Boundaries are also a kind of mercy. Start again, I said. Start honest. Earn it daily, quietly, with work worth keeping close. She reached for her bag without ceremony, slid the strap across her shoulder like a sash of victory that had expired, and walked to the door. Not a glance at the photos, the clock, the table that fed her politely. The latch clicked, and the house sighed in a way only houses know. Drew stood motionless, eyes pinned to a place between the deed and the confetti, as if refusal could rewind arithmetic. Stone comes from pressure. I watched it form across his jaw, his shoulders, his posture begging someone to tell him how to breathe again. I didn't fill the silence. Silence did its own work, chiseling away the statue until a boy's outline flickered underneath. He pressed his hand to his forehead, and missed fingers landing in his hair like a man searching for a switch. "I didn't see," he muttered. I believed him and didn't. Both can be true. The door stayed closed. Winter settled, then thinned. We stood inside the weather together, finally hearing it properly. I didn't raise my voice. I placed it. "Get out of my granddaughter's house." I said each word set where a hinge should go. He blinked, stunned that kindness could have a backbone. I wasn't throwing him in tonight. I was handing him a map he had refused to read. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors with conditions. "Come back when you can stand on your own name," I added, softer, not smaller. He looked toward the hallway, toward the room where trophies gather dust and childhood sleeps, and then back at me, like a man asking permission to be forgiven. I shook my head because forgiveness without repair is just another loan. He found his coat by touch. The knob turned slowly, as if velocity could negotiate meaning. Cold air visited our ankles, then left. I locked the deadbolt and felt the click travel through the framing down to the foundation we poured with tired hands. Love stayed stern, the way a lighthouse loves a ship that can see. My house returned to its resting rhythm, the small creaks like old friends settling in. For a longer story, I washed 2 coffee cups out of habit and put one back on the shelf facing it forward for tomorrow. Grief doesn't leave, it learns your schedule. I sat in the chair that remembers his weight and counted heartbeats the way we used to count tips after double shifts, slow, grateful, amazed the day still had anything left to give. I told him what happened quietly, not for ghosts, but for the woman who keeps promises to the dead by keeping promises to the living. Outside, a siren drifted and disappeared. I pictured his hands scar on the thumb from a careless can. Veins you could set your watch by, and measured my pulse to that metronome. I owed him steadiness. I owed him truth without spectacle. I owed him staying. The house warmed a little around the vent. I folded the blanket once more, like prayer, and chose to sleep. That night, 4 months makes a different kind of quiet, less ache, more echo. At the Long Beach hub, the air smells like diesel and problem-solving forklifts, beeping out their polite warnings while men and women thread weight through narrow aisles. I sign in clip on the badge and take the visitor vest nobody argues about, because I've worn every version of it. Hard hats make strangers equals. I like that. The concrete hums with deadlines. Steel doors roll up like eyelids. I walk the floor with the same attention I give a church aisle nodding hello, asking about back orders and family flu. Work tells the truth about people. You can hear it in how they call out weights, how they check straps twice without waiting for a supervisor. Jules waves from a catwalk, already on 3 calls, trust curling easy in his hand. I stop at Dock C, where the Pacific breathes in salt and schedules, and the crane lines draw their patient geometry against a sky that forgives everything. He's at the end of the bay scanner, on a lanyard like an overdue apology vest. Too big in the shoulders and perfect everywhere else. He doesn't see me at first. He's counting lips, moving around numbers, the way a man relearns a language he once spoke fluently. The clipboard wobbles, then steadies. I watch him lift a pallet jack with his legs. Not his back, exactly as taught, exactly as practiced. New calluses have started where excuses used to live. Thumb palm, the tender pad under the ring finger. Sweat makes sincerity undeniable. He wipes his brow with the back of his wrist and looks up, eyes skimming the horizon before landing on me. No flinch, no script, just a nod that understands arrival and consequence. We stand with a dock's width between us, distance, but not dismissal. Weights match, he calls voice carrying over compressor hiss. I nod because truth should be acknowledged out loud. He smiles small and real, the kind that remembers how laughter used to fit. Break comes like weather announced, then unavoidable. He walks over with his lunch pail and a folded envelope, palms it to me without ceremony, the way men hand each other wrenches. First payment. He says, not quite meeting my eyes, and I can hear the arithmetic behind the sentence, rent, gas, groceries, pride. I open it and count the bills the old-fashioned way because counting deserves witnesses. 5 crisp hundreds breathe air for the first time. He doesn't promise next month. He promises nothing except the dignity of showing up again. There's relief in not negotiating. I slip the money back into the envelope and tuck it in my purse like any other receipt. Thank you, he adds, and it's new, the thank you that understands cost. I offer water. He accepts. We drink leaning against a yellow bollard that has met more ships than either of us will. He looks smaller than his guilt and larger than his history. That ratio, I've learned, predicts whether a man can change over time. I hand the envelope back and point to the terminal. Office board schedules, safety notes, a photo of a little girl with braids. You're not paying me, I tell him. You're paying her back. He looks shoulders settle into a shape work can hold. We walk in. I sign a deposit slip for her account. Tuition trumpet braces a backpack she'll scuff with good trouble. He watches the stamp land like a bridge taking weight. I'll add more, he says. Add consistency, I answer. Scars are maps that don't apologize. I choose how this one heals. I stop writing speeches for deaf rooms and feed the woman I am after. Sorrow, Tuesday, cornbread, long walks past familiar porches. He starts at 0 timesheets, clean bays, tied loads. Most nights, silence tutors him. Love runs alongside without grabbing the handlebars. On my lock screen, her grin keeps the ledger honest. I reread the trust name, slowly let gratitude do its work. The house hums useful again. I set small timers, open the door to weather, not the past. I'm not finished forgiving, but I'm done bleeding. Tonight's quiet feels earned. At LaRue, I learned this paper tears clean, but character does not. The night I stood under that closed for private event sign, I thought the choice was between love and pride. It wasn't. It was between enabling and dignity. Dignity outlives money because it keeps showing up after the bill is paid, at the sink on the dock, in the quiet where no one claps. I didn't save a wedding. I saved a future, one clause at a time, one boundary-shaped door at a time. Mercy came too, but in work boots, not pearls, repayment, not rehearsed apologies, schedules, not speeches. I can hold 2 truths without dropping either. He hurt me, and I hope he becomes the man his daughter can borrow courage from. If you've ever stood outside a locked room you funded, you know the ache and the relief of walking away upright. So tell me, sister travelers who count coupons and choices with the same care, what would you do at that door? Plant your feet and stand firm, or uncurl your hand and forgive.